The school hallway was quiet now. It was a special kind of quiet, the kind that only happened after the last bell had rung and the last shout had echoed off the lockers. The air still hummed with the ghost of the day, the smell of pencil shavings, old books, and the lemony cleaner he used. He pushed the wide mop bucket slowly, its wheels making a soft, steady sound on the shiny floor. His name was Leo, and this was his time. The day belonged to the students, to the teachers, to the chaos of learning and living. But the evening, this quiet, empty stretch of it, was his. His job was to make the place new again, to wipe away the scuff marks of 100 sneakers, to erase the dust from the chalkboards, to empty the bins filled with crumpled paper and apple cores. It was honest work. He took pride in seeing a hallway gleam under the fluorescent lights, knowing he had put that shine there. To the kids who rushed past him during the day, he was just part of the building. A friendly face in a gray uniform who held doors open and pointed you toward the lost and found. They called him Mr. Leo, if they called him anything at all. They didn't know his story, and he liked it that way. His real story, the one that mattered, waited for him at home in a small, tidy house just a 10-minute walk from the school. It was a story that had a name, Chloe. She was 12, with eyes that saw right into the heart of things and a smile that could make the hardest day feel soft. 5 years ago, the world had gone very quiet for Leo and Chloe. His wife, her mother, had been taken from them by a sickness that moved faster than any of their love or their prayers could. The music in their house had stopped. For a long time, the only sounds were tears and the heavy silence of missing someone. Leo had been a musician once, not just someone who played, but someone who spoke through the keys. He had gone to a famous school for music in New York a lifetime ago. His hands had been made for the piano, flying across it, making people feel things just with sound. But when she got sick, the concerts, the practice, the dream, it all faded into background noise. The only thing that mattered was her. And then, the only thing that mattered was Chloe. After she was gone, Leo sold his good piano. It felt like selling a piece of his own lungs, but he needed the money. He needed to be there, completely, for his little girl. He got the custodian job at Oak Ridge High because the hours were right. He could work nights, be home to get Chloe off to school in the morning, and be there when she came home in the afternoon. It wasn't fancy, but it was steady. It kept a roof over their heads and food on the table, but there was one luxury, one splurge he allowed himself. Every Tuesday and Thursday, after school, Chloe went to piano lessons with Mrs. Allen, the kind older music teacher at the very school he cleaned. It was expensive. The cost of those lessons was why he wore shoes with mended soles and why they didn't take vacations. But he never once thought of stopping them, because the music had come back, but in a different way. It had started with Chloe. One evening, about a year after her mother passed, she had wandered over to the old, slightly out-of-tune upright piano they still had in the living room. She had pressed a single key, and the note hung in the air of their quiet house. Then another. She had asked him, "Show me something, Dad." With a heart that felt too big for his chest, he had sat beside her on the bench. He hadn't played a proper piece in so long. His fingers felt thick and stupid. But he showed her how to make a simple chord, how a C major sounded happy and clean. Her small finger poked at the keys next to his, and a sound came out that wasn't just a note. It was a beginning dot now. Chloe lived for her lessons. She practiced on the old upright every day after homework. Leo would listen from the kitchen as he made dinner, hearing the hesitant scales turn into real songs. She was good. She had her mother's focus, and he liked to think, a little bit of his ear for the music. His own playing was a secret, just for them. Sometimes, after her practice, she would curl up on the sofa and say, "Play me the Moon one," Dad, and he would sit at the old piano, the one with the chipped key and the slight buzz in the middle C, and he would play Clair de Lune. He didn't play it like he used to, with flash and technical perfection. He played it softly, slowly, like a lullaby. He played it and thought of his wife's smile, of the way the moonlight used to fall across her side of the bed. Chloe would listen, her eyes sometimes closed, and he knew she was thinking of her mom, too. At peace was their memory, their shared, quiet prayer dot at the school. The grand piano in the auditorium was just another thing to clean. He would dust its lid carefully, wipe the smooth, black wood, and sometimes, very quickly, run a cloth over the ivory keys. He never sat at it. It felt like a different world, a world that belonged to the students in their recitals and the guest performers who came through. That piano, with its perfect tone and powerful voice, was for the Leos of the past, not the Leo of now. His world was in the halls, with his mop and his bucket, and at home, with his daughter and their slightly buzzing upright. He finished the main hallway and pushed his cart toward the auditorium. The big double doors were open. Inside, the place was a hive of activity for a change. It was the night of the Winter Gala recital, one of the biggest music events of the year. Students in nice clothes and their parents were finding seats. Backstage, he could see flashes of nervous movement. He stood in the shadow of the doorway, leaning on his mop handle. His eyes scanned the crowd, looking for one person. And there she was, in the third row, wearing the dark blue dress they'd picked out together, her hair neatly braided. Chloe. She was twisting her hands in her lap, a bundle of nerves and excitement. She was performing tonight, a short sonatina by Clementi. She'd been practicing for months. A warm pride spread through his chest, pushing back the tiredness in his shoulders. This was why he did it. Every swept floor, every emptied bin, led to this moment his daughter, on a stage, ready to share the music they both loved. He was just the janitor, but he was her janitor. And as he watched her, that was more than enough. The backstage area was a world away from the quiet hallways Leo knew. It hummed with a different kind of energy, a fizzy, nervous electricity. Students in crisp white shirts and flowing dresses tuned violins, ran through vocal scales under their breath, and checked their sheet music for the 100th time. Leo moved through the edge of it all, invisible as a shadow. His job was to make sure the performer's waiting area was tidy, that no water bottles or stray music sheets were left on the floor. He worked slowly, carefully, giving the young musicians a wide berth. He caught snippets of whispered conversations. "My hands are so sweaty. I think I forgot the second repeat." And it made him smile a little. He remembered that feeling, the flutter in the stomach just before stepping into the light. It felt like a lifetime ago. The star of the evening, the main act that would close the first half of the show, was a man named Mr. Thorne. He was a well-known piano teacher in the city, with a reputation for being both brilliant and a bit dramatic. Leo had seen him arrive earlier, sweeping in with a long wool coat and a sense of importance. Mr. Thorne was currently in one of the small practice rooms, supposedly doing his final warm-ups, his low, rumbling scales echoing through the wall. Leo finished wiping down a table and glanced out through the narrow gap in the side curtain. He had a perfect secret view of the audience. His eyes found Chloe again. She was now sitting up very straight, her hands clasped in her lap, watching the current performer, a flutist with serious concentration. The sight of her there, so small and so brave, filled him with a love so fierce it almost hurt Dot just then, the music director. A kind but perpetually flustered woman named Miss Evans rushed past him. Her glasses were perched on top of her head, and she was clutching a clipboard to her chest like a life preserver. She was muttering to herself. Program order, guest bios, lighting cues. She was a good person who cared deeply about her students. But big events like this turned her into a human tornado. The flutist finished her piece to polite applause. Miss Evans smoothed her skirt and walked onto the stage to address the audience. "Thank you. That was beautiful," she said, her voice amplified and friendly. "Now we have a real treat for you. To close this first half of our program, we are thrilled to present a performance by the renowned Mr. Thorne. He will be playing 2 pieces by Chopin. Please give him a warm welcome." The applause swelled. The stage lights dimmed slightly, leaving a single bright pool of light on the grand piano. Everyone backstage paused, waiting for the main event. But Mr. Thorne did not appear. A few seconds of expectant silence ticked by. The applause died down, replaced by a soft murmur of confusion. Leo saw Miss Evans peer into the wings from her spot on stage, her smile becoming strained dot from the practice room. The sound of scales had stopped. Instead, there was the sharp, frantic sound of a phone conversation. Leo, standing closest to the door, couldn't help but overhear. "It's where? But the roads are barely passable. There's no other flight?" A pause, filled with the tinny distress of a voice on the other end. Mr. Thorne's voice grew louder, more panicked. "This is a disaster. I can't just... I'm 2 hours away. I'm stuck." Leo's stomach dropped. He knew what this meant. The practice room door flew open. Mr. Thorne stood there, his face pale. He wasn't wearing his performance suit jacket anymore. He was pulling on his overcoat. He saw Miss Evans, who had scurried off the stage, her face a mask of horror. "It's the snowstorm," Mr. Thorne said, his voice tight. "My flight home from the regional competition was diverted. I'm at the airport in Milford. The roads between here and there are closed. A tree down, they said. I can't get back. I'm so sorry." The words hung in the air like a bad smell. Miss Evans looked as if she'd been slapped. "But the program. 20 minutes." She stammered, looking down at her clipboard, as if it might offer an answer it didn't have. "We have nothing to fill that time. The intermission isn't for another 40 minutes. Backstage, the students had gone completely quiet. They all understood the magnitude of the problem. A huge, awkward hole had just been ripped in the middle of their recital dot. Mr. Thorne was already moving, full of his own drama and distress. 1,000 apologies. A true act of God, you must explain to the audience. And with that, he was gone, bustling out the back door into the swirling snow, leaving a vacuum of panic behind him. Miss Evans put a hand to her forehead. She looked out at the audience, who were beginning to shift in their seats, the silence stretching too long. She had to go back out there and say something. But what? A scheduled performer had vanished. She had no backup plan. Her eyes, wide with desperation, swept across the backstage area. They landed on the students, their faces worried. They landed on the parent volunteers, who shrugged helplessly. Then, almost by accident, her gaze fell on Leo. He was just standing there by his cleaning cart, a silent witness to the crisis. She wasn't really seeing him, not Leo the person. She was seeing a fixture, part of the backdrop of the school. In her panic, words just tumbled out of her mouth, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. "Oh, what are we going to do? If only we had anyone who could just go out there and play something. A simple piece, anything to fill this time. This is a nightmare." Her voice was full of real anguish. She was talking to the universe, not to him. But the words landed on Leo with a physical weight. His heart, which had been beating a steady rhythm of sympathy, suddenly kicked into a faster, harder drumbeat. Anyone. His hands, resting on the handle of his mop, felt cold. 1,000 instincts screamed at once. No, absolutely not. He hadn't performed for strangers in over a decade. The very idea made his breath catch. He was Leo the janitor. He played lullabies on a buzzy piano for his daughter. The man who could command that grand piano on stage didn't exist anymore. He took a small step back, deeper into the shadows, shaking his head slightly, hoping she wouldn't actually look at him. But someone else was looking. From his spot in the wings, Leo had been keeping one eye on the audience, on Chloe. He saw her head turn. She had been watching the stage, confused by the delay. She had heard Miss Evans's desperate exclamation. And now she was looking right at him. Her expression changed. The confusion melted away. The nervous excitement she'd had for her own performance was gone, replaced by something else, something clear and certain and fierce. It was the look she got when she finally mastered a difficult passage after hours of practice. It was a knowing look. Before he could process it, she was moving. She slipped out of her seat in the third row, ignoring the whispered questions from the friend next to her. She walked quickly, not down the aisle toward the exit, but toward the side of the auditorium, toward the small, unmarked door that led backstage. She appeared beside him, so suddenly it made him jump. The backstage chaos swirled around them. Miss Evans was now wringing her hands, near tears, but for a moment it was just father and daughter in a little bubble of quiet. She didn't beg. She didn't plead. She looked up at him, her blue dress swishing, and put her small hand on his arm, right on the gray fabric of his uniform sleeve. Her touch was gentle but firm. "Dad," she said, her voice a low, urgent whisper meant only for him. "Please." He looked down into her face, searching for the little girl he needed to protect from disappointment. But he didn't see a little girl. He saw a young woman, full of a faith so complete it stole his words away. "Chloe, I can't." He started, his own voice a dry rasp dot. She cut him off, her eyes never leaving his. "Play her piece," she whispered. "Play Claire de Lune." The air left his lungs. That piece, their piece, the one tied to every memory of love and loss. To play it here now, in front of all these people. It felt like taking his heart out of his chest and laying it on the piano lid. Miss Evans, having seen Chloe approach, stared at them, utterly baffled. "Chloe, what is it, honey?" "I'm a little busy with a—" Chloe turned to her, still holding her father's arm. "Mr. Leo can play," she said, her voice clear and confident now, cutting through the teacher's panic. "He can play the piano. He's really good." Miss Evans blinked, her brain struggling to catch up. She looked from Chloe's determined face to Leo's stunned one, down at his custodian uniform, and back again. "Leo? You? You play?" It was the most absurd sentence Leo had ever heard. In this context, in this moment of high-stakes crisis, it was like asking if he knew how to fly. He opened his mouth, a dozen polite, furrow refusals lining up on his tongue, but Chloe let go of his arm. She reached out and took the mop handle from his loose grip. Her small hands closed around it firmly. She gave him a tiny, almost imperceptible push toward the stage. "Trust me," she said. And in that smile, swift and sure, he didn't see just Chloe. He saw her mother. The same unwavering belief, the same fearless encouragement that had once convinced him to audition for schools he thought were out of his reach. It was a ghost and a promise, all in one look. He was out of moves, out of excuses. The audience was rustling, the silence turning awkward. Miss Evans was staring at him, a wild, desperate hope dawning in her eyes. Leo Vance looked at the grand piano, sitting lonely in that pool of light. He looked at his daughter, holding his mop like a standard. He took a deep, shaky breath that felt like his first in years. And he took a step, not back into the shadows, but forward toward the light. The walk from the wings to the center of the stage felt like a mile. With every step, Leo's mind screamed at him to turn around. The lights were so bright, they washed out the first few rows of the audience, turning people into dark, shapeless blurs. But he could feel their eyes. Hundreds of them. A soft, confused murmur rippled through the crowd as he appeared. He wasn't supposed to be here. He knew what they saw. A man in a simple gray uniform, the kind worn by the people who empty the trash and wipe the boards. His work shoes, comfortable for mopping halls, made a soft, solid sound on the wooden stage, entirely wrong for this place. He looked like he had wandered out by mistake, lost on his cleaning rounds. Missy Evans, her face a mask of frantic hope and utter terror, stepped up to the microphone. Her voice cracked slightly. "Ladies and gentlemen, it appears, well, there's been a last-minute change. Due to the, weather." She trailed off, clearly having no script for this. "We are grateful that Mr. Leo, one of our dedicated staff members, has agreed to step in for us. Please, a warm welcome." The applause that followed was polite, thin, and full of puzzlement. It was the sound people make when they don't understand what's happening but want to be kind. A few people clapped a bit harder, likely parents of students who recognized the friendly janitor who always held the door. Leo didn't hear the applause. A roaring silence filled his ears. He stood beside the grand piano, a magnificent, glossy beast that seemed to dwarf him. This wasn't his chipped, buzzy upright at home. This was an instrument of performance, of judgment. He hadn't touched a piano like this since he sold his own, a lifetime ago. For a long, awful moment, he just stared at the keys. They were a landscape of black and white, familiar and terrifyingly foreign. His hands, which had just been holding a mop handle, hung at his sides. They felt like blocks of wood, clumsy and huge. The rough skin on his fingers from years of work suddenly seemed like a barrier between him and the smooth ivory. Asterisk, what am I doing? The thought was a cold wave. Asterisk, I can't do this. I'll humiliate myself. I'll humiliate Chloe. Asterisk, he could feel the audience's patience thinning. The polite confusion was curdling into awkwardness. A cough echoed in the quiet. Someone shifted in a seat, the sound like a gunshot in the hush. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw her. Chloe had moved to the very edge of the stage wings, still holding his mop. She wasn't smiling anymore. Her face was set in an expression of intense concentration, her eyes locked on him. She gave one small, firm nod. "Play your piece." The words echoed in his head, not as a sound, but as a feeling. It was no longer about filling time or saving a show. It was about answering a call. His daughter's call. And his wife's memory. He pulled out the piano bench. It scraped softly on the stage. He sat down. The bench was set for Mr. Thorne, who was taller. It was too low. In any normal performance, this would be a disaster. But in the strange dream he was in, it felt right. It made him feel even smaller, more humble before the instrument. He placed his hands on his knees, trying to stop them from shaking. He closed his eyes for just a second. He didn't see the darkened auditorium. He saw his living room, the lamp with the cracked shade casting a warm yellow circle on the old piano. He saw Chloe, 8 years old, in her pajamas, curled on the sofa with a warm blanket. He heard her sleepy voice. "Play me the moon one, Dad." He opened his eyes. The bright stage lights blurred into a soft, moon-like glow. The dark shapes of the audience faded away. It was just him, the piano, and the memory. He lifted his hands. They didn't feel like his own. They were the hands of the young man he used to be, remembered by the hands of the man he was now. They hovered over the keys. And then he began. The first notes of Debussy's Clair de Lune were so quiet they were almost just a thought. They were hesitant, a little broken, like someone remembering a language they hadn't spoken in years. He played the opening arpeggio slowly, each note a separate, fragile thing. The audience was absolutely still. This wasn't what they expected. They expected maybe a clumsy chopsticks, a simple nursery rhyme to kill time. This was something else. This was a whisper in a quiet room. Leo's fingers gained a fraction of confidence. He wasn't thinking about technique. He wasn't thinking about the famous impressionist style or the proper pedaling. He was thinking of the way his wife used to hum along, off-key, when he practiced. He was thinking of the first time he played this piece for her, in a tiny apartment with no furniture except a mattress and a piano. He was thinking of the last time when she was so thin in the hospital bed, and he played it from memory while she slept, hoping the music would reach her in her dreams. The music began to flow. It wasn't perfect. A note here or there was softer than it should be. A phrase lingered a breath too long. But the imperfection was what made it real. This wasn't a performance. It was a confession. It was a man saying, "Asterisk, I have loved, and I have lost, and this is the sound of what remains." Asterisk, the melody unfolded, gentle and sad and incredibly beautiful. It painted pictures in the quiet air, not of a French moonlight, but of a nightlight in a child's room, of a silent kitchen after a long day, of holding someone's hand and having nothing left to say but the touch dot in the wings. Chloe let the mop lean against the wall. She wrapped her arms around herself, her eyes shining, watching her father speak a language only their family truly understood. Miss Evans had brought her hands to her mouth, her earlier panic completely forgotten, replaced by awe dot in the audience. The initial awkwardness had long vanished. People weren't just listening. They were holding their breath. A mother reached for her teenage son's hand and held it tight. An older man in the back stared straight ahead, his jaw tight, remembering something of his own. The piece did that. It didn't tell one story. It unlocked everyone's private stories of quiet love and quiet grief. Leo reached the middle section, where the music swells with a deeper, more turbulent emotion. His hands moved with more force now, not the flashy force of a showman, but the raw force of feeling. This was the anger, the loneliness, the sheer hard work of being left behind, of being the one who has to keep sweeping the floors and making the lunches and being strong. The notes rose, full and aching, filling the auditorium not with noise, but with a profound shared sorrow dot. And then, as it must, the storm within the music passed. It softened, retreated, returning to the gentle, rocking melody of the beginning. It was the acceptance, the finding of a new rhythm, the joy that could still be found in a braid in a daughter's hair, in a shared joke, in the silent understanding across a dinner table. He played the final fading notes. They hung in the air, delicate as cobwebs, and then dissolved into silence. He kept his hands on the keys, his head bowed. He was back in his body now, aware of the bright lights, the vast quiet. He was exhausted, as if he had just run a long, hard race. The dream was over. He was just Leo again, the janitor on a stage where he didn't belong. He didn't know what to do next. He slowly lifted his hands and placed them back in his lap. He stared at the piano lid, waiting for the first confused cough, the slow, pitying clap that would break the spell. But the spell wasn't broken. The silence held for 1 second more. 2. Then, it wasn't a clap that broke it. It was a sound like a single, sharp breath from the entire audience at once. And then, from the front row, someone stood up. Then another person beside them. And then, like a wave rising, every single person in the auditorium was on their feet. The sound that followed wasn't just applause. It was an eruption. It was thunderous, sustained, and wet with tears. It was a roar of gratitude, of shared emotion, of complete and utter respect. They weren't applauding a flawless performance. They were applauding a heart laid bare. They were applauding the invisible man they passed every day, now suddenly, breathtakingly seen. The roar of the crowd washed over Leo, a physical thing that seemed to vibrate the stage under his feet. It was too much, too loud, too bright. For 5 years, his world had been quiet halls and the soft, contained space of his home. This sound, this overwhelming wave of feeling directed at him, was terrifying. He stood up from the piano bench, his legs feeling unsteady. He didn't know how to bow. He just gave a small, awkward nod toward the blur of standing people, his face hot with a confusion of feelings: embarrassment, shock, and a strange, distant relief. The act was done. The secret was out. He turned and almost stumbled off the stage, walking quickly back into the shadows of the wings. The noise of the applause chased him, muffled but insistent. The backstage area was transformed. The nervous energy from before was gone, replaced by a buzzing, awestruck silence among the waiting students. They stared at him as he passed, their eyes wide, as if he were a ghost or a superhero who had just landed in their midst. One of the older boys, a talented saxophonist Leo often chatted with about baseball, gave him a quick, firm thumbs up, his mouth open in a grin. Miss Evans was there, tears streaming openly down her cheeks, ruining her careful makeup. She reached for his arm as he passed. Leo, I had no idea. That was the most beautiful. But she was too emotional to finish. She just squeezed his arm and let him go, turning back to the stage to try and regain control of her program. Leo didn't stop. He needed air, or at least the illusion of it. He walked straight past his cleaning cart, past the staring faces, and pushed through the heavy door that led into the empty main hallway. The sudden quiet was a shock, almost as loud as the applause had been. The familiar, lemon-scented air of the school hallway felt like a blanket he could hide under. He leaned against the cool tiles of the wall, closing his eyes. His heart was still pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. In his mind, he could still see the black and white keys, feel the weight of the chords under his fingers. He could still feel the ghost of his wife in the music, the way her memory had guided every phrase. It had been like touching a live wire to his past, and he was still trembling from the shock. The door creaked open softly. He didn't need to look to know it was Chloe. She came and stood beside him, not saying a word at first. She just slipped her hand into his. Her hand was small and warm, an anchor in the storm of his feelings. After a long moment, she spoke, her voice quiet in the huge, empty hall. "You played it for her," she said. It wasn't a question. He nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He had played it for her mother, yes, but he had also played it for Chloe, to show her who he was, who he had been, to show her that the music in their house wasn't just a hobby. It was his soul, and he had just given it to her and to everyone. "They saw you, Dad," she whispered, squeezing his hand. "They really saw you." That was the thing that undid him. A single tear escaped, tracing a hot path down his cheek. He quickly wiped it away with the back of his free hand, the rough skin catching on the stubble on his face. He was seen. For years, he had been a quiet man in a gray uniform, a friendly face in the background. Now they had seen the pain, the love, the history. It felt like standing naked in front of the whole town. Back inside, the recital had continued. The second half began, but the air in the auditorium was permanently changed. The performances that followed were good, some even excellent, but they were all happening in the long shadow of what had just occurred. When Chloe went on to play her Clementi sonatina, her usual nerves seemed smaller. She played with a clean, confident clarity. As she took her bow, the applause for her was warm and strong. Many in the audience now knew who her father was, and their claps held a new layer of respect. Leo didn't go back in to watch. He stayed in the hallway, slowly collecting himself. He eventually started his rounds again, almost on autopilot. The familiar motions of wiping a drinking fountain, checking a classroom door, were a comfort. They were real. They were his job. When the final applause of the evening echoed through the building, signaling the end, Leo knew what was coming. He thought about hiding in the janitor's closet until everyone left. But he made himself walk toward the front lobby, where parents were collecting their children. It was like walking into a different world. Before, parents would nod politely or ask where the lost and found was. Now they stopped him. Every few steps, someone would touch his shoulder or reach out to shake his hand. Mr. Leo, that was. Incredible, a mother said, her eyes red-rimmed. Thank you. Sir, you moved my wife to tears. We've never heard anything like it, said a father, gripping his hand firmly. A grandmother, using a walker, patted his arm. Young man, you have a gift. You gave us all a gift tonight. He nodded, mumbled thank you, and tried to keep moving, feeling like an imposter in his own uniform. He just wanted to find Chloe and go home. He saw her near the main doors, talking excitedly with a group of her friends. They were all looking at her with new admiration. She broke away when she saw him and ran over, her blue dress swirling. She threw her arms around his waist in a tight hug, right there in the middle of everyone. Ready to go? He asked softly, resting his chin on the top of her head. She nodded, her face buried in his shirt dot. As they turned to leave, Miss Evans intercepted them. She had composed herself, though her eyes were still bright. Leo, wait, she said. She looked at him, really looked at him, as if for the first time. I don't even know what to say. I feel foolish for not knowing. For all these years. It's okay, he said, meaning it. He hadn't wanted anyone to know. It's not, she said gently. That wasn't just someone filling in. That was art. Where did you learn to play like that? He gave the simplest answer. A long time ago. Before. She understood. She nodded slowly. Well, the school. I would be honored if you would consider playing again sometime. For the spring concert. Or even just to work with some of the advanced students. They could learn so much from you. Not just about notes, but about feeling. The offer hung in the air. It was a bridge from his hidden past into his present life. A door opening in a wall he built carefully. Before, the idea would have made him shrink away. Now, he felt a strange, tentative flicker. He didn't say yes. But for the first time, he didn't immediately say no. We'll talk, was all he said. Miss Evans smiled, a real warm smile. Please, good night, Chloe. You played beautifully, too. The walk home was quiet. The snow had stopped, leaving the world hushed and glittering under the streetlights. Chloe slipped her hand into his again. They walked in silence for a block. I'm proud of you, he finally said, his voice rough. I'm proud of you, she answered immediately, swinging their linked hands. Mom would be, too. He looked up at the sky, clear now, with a few brave stars piercing the blackness. He felt emptied out, but in a clean way, like an old, dusty room that had finally been aired out. He had done the thing he feared most. He had played, and the world hadn't ended. In fact, for the first time in a very long time, it felt like it might just be beginning again.